So we're going to talk about how we can all work together to promote inclusivity in STEM, specifically by creating this idea of institutional insiders. And this is our team. We have our director, Lisa McNair, Phyllis Newbill, myself, and Chelsea Lyles, Kim Keith, and Jamie Little. And we'll all be talking a little bit today about our different perspectives. Before we get started, if you can drop in the chat, how do you feel today on this Squirrel Scale? So it's a lot easier to read the room when we're in person. We also realized that this is one of the last presentation slots of the conference, and by this point you may be feeling a little tired and conferenced out. So participate however you feel able, and you're able to get the most out of it, either with video on or off, and feel free to unmute and chat with us if you want, or use the actual chat box. So essentially, take what you need from the session and leave what you can. Lots of different scroll ratings. 9, eating lunch. I just finished my lunch. Scroll number 1. I like him. All right. So we'll talk a little bit about how we think the differences of outreach and engagement and how we term those. So both of these are good and can be needed in different situations. But community outreach we see tends to be short-term, more in the field of marketing, sort of advertising things that you're doing. And we see really that one group's benefiting most from that. So we at Virginia Tech, this might be an outreach event that's created to just create awareness of Virginia Tech, potentially encourage more students to attend. We also see that there can be community engagement, which really tends to be more long-term and relationship building and creating this idea of a partnership. As liaisons, we tend to focus a little bit more in the engagement area. So how can we focus our relationships? How can we build our relationships? And then how can we leverage these relationships to create the most benefit? And we also have a big cyclical theme of what are we doing well, what needs to be improved. So we work a lot on iteration. All right. So if you can type in the chat what area of outreach or engagement you're most interested in, and you might have a different area, but we typically focus on this idea of K-12, businesses, some community groups, but could be something like church, museums. So most everyone here seems like they're from K-12, some community, some all. Industry. Oh, after school programs. That's cool. So with us, we tend to focus a lot on our K-12 engagement. So if you are familiar with K-12, you might recognize this learning objective. After this session, we want you to be able to describe CENI and the characteristics of a liaison, discuss at least 2 ways liaisons can promote equity in education, and identify at least 1 strategy for assessing outreach efforts in a more equitable way. So for us, we're going to focus on the idea of telling this as a story, because again, we realize that you've been at this conference for a while, and we really want to make this more entertaining. And we think we all have a story to tell. So we're going to share our experiences of what it's been like building this liaison network, helping Virginia Tech increase its inclusivity, especially focused on STEM outreach and engagement. And the first story that we're going to hear will be from Lisa McNair, who's our director. And she is going to talk more about how this is this goal of inclusivity in STEM became our mission.
Sorry, sort of sliding in to second base here. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all today. So I'm going to talk about how the center was formed and start with how I came to kind of this whole arena of outreach and engagement as a tenure track faculty researcher from the Department of Engineering Education at Virginia Tech. And sometimes it seems like the tenure track can be this near impossible hero's journey with monsters and mazes, all kinds of challenges, you know, kind of one step forward, two steps back sort of thing. While faculty really often have sincere interest in doing different kinds of outreach and engagement, they often don't know how. So in my case, being only the second college degree person in my family, I was always interested in first generation students, and but I didn't know how to do outreach and access to pre-K-12, any of those ages, and getting there always seemed to turn into a labyrinth, and sometimes I just never got through. So when I had the opportunity to join and lead a center that brought the different stakeholders together, I jumped at that opportunity. So our center started a long time ago in 2002 with Sue Magliero, who was a former special ed teacher, and she had advanced throughout the university ranks to directing the School of Education. When she formed VT STEM, as it was then called, it was kind of a build it and they will come sort of enterprise. And she was really wanting to, we were living here in Southwest Virginia. She looked around, she wanted to open the gates of Virginia Tech, reach out, literally bring in school kids and teachers from our region into Virginia Tech. During this era, she started something called K-C, kindergarten to college, which was destined to bring in, and I have 20,000, but I think it was a bigger number than that over the years. Fifth graders, but mainly it was focused on fifth graders, their teachers, parents, and bring them into Virginia Tech to experience college for a day. Reaching out to students and teachers in Southwest Virginia is reaching out to communities where a lot of people haven't ever attended college. So at this point, the center as VT STEM started saying, hey, you know, look at these people that we're having in here. Let's start counting them at least, and figuring out who's coming, where they're coming from, what did they like about the experience, what do they like about science and engineering, how can we keep them interested, how can we keep them coming. So one answer was to connect kids and research faculty. How do we do that? Okay, so the next kind of era of our center, we were collecting data to answer these kinds of questions. And this revealed that the center was as much a research enterprise as an outreach enterprise. And so we morphed into the Center for Research and Seed Education, SEED standing for Science, Engineering, Arts, and Design. And this name tracked our emphasis on gathering evidence to help guide our research and engagement activities, and to really start asking questions about STEM, science, and how we were communicating that. At the same time, another signature event, the Virginia Tech Science Festival, and Phyllis Newbill is here. She'll talk about it later on in the presentation, helped grow this festival bigger and bigger and bigger, broader and broader and broader, and adopting the motto of science is bigger than you think. So encouraging everyone in that way. So both the Science Festival and the K2C field trips We're supported by other stakeholders who prioritized outreach that included children in the region who are underrepresented in STEM disciplines and in college and going in general. And they supported the events by providing transportation and meals and funds for substitute teachers. The whole science festival and K2C is run on volunteer work. So meanwhile, the center continued to pose questions. What does STEM mean? Does it include art and design? And during this era, the first liaison relationships were formed also with Montgomery County Public School System. And Julie will tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. And also with the Science Museum of Western Virginia, which is in nearby Roanoke, about 45 minutes away. Okay, and so next slide. As our events and connections kept growing this way, we increasingly saw that at the core of everything we do is relationships. So this led to our latest formation, our latest name change, the Center for Networks and Educational Impacts, CENI for short. And the Liaison Network was really at the core of that. We saw that having people who were embedded at the university, embedded in different learning provider sites in the community was really something special and was really helping people work together more smoothly and more knowledgeably. So our liaison network has grown to 2 more school systems, Radford City Schools with Jamie Little, who you'll hear from in just a minute, and Floyd County Schools with Kim. And also we expanded to 2 Virginia Tech satellites. One is in the Roanoke Center in Roanoke, and one is at Reynolds Homestead. And you can see from the pictures here, our region can be very urban, can be very rural, and we also have an advisory board that spans the entire university and also spans different parts of the state. And so speaking of the state, some of our data is looking at geographic locations, so a lot of place-based sorts of initiatives to figure out where our outreach as a university is going, where it is not going. And some of it is place-based, also more culturally as well. So these are some of the research questions that continue as we keep going along. And somewhat like ARIS, our changes in name have reflected our broadening commitment to broadening ways of thinking and defining STEM and how to include different cultural groups in that community. So just in summary of my story, at this point, now I know ways for faculty to bring their research to different audiences, but more than that, the university now also has these allies, the liaisons who have expertise and on-the-ground knowledge for making the most of all of our strengths to meet the needs of learning communities throughout our region. So a community university liaison is an education expert who participates in both organizations. So spends time at Virginia Tech, knowing people there, meeting people there, making connections, spends time in a school system or at a museum or a center, is financially supported by both organizations so that there's, kind of skin in the game. Both organizations are putting in resources to fund that person, spends time in both locations and serves as a boundary spanner. So hopefully we're making those boundaries lighter, fuzzier, but they're still there, and there's definitely value in knowing that they're there and having somebody help span those. Okay, so that is the end of my story. Not
All
the
right.
end. It's the beginning.
So Lisa's story really talks more about the evolution of outreach of our center, and how we're really focusing on relationships within groups, between groups, and this idea of crossing boundaries. So Lisa introduced this term of boundary spanners, that when we're in an organization, we have this boundary that exists around us, and how do we get across that boundary? How do we bridge it to reach people in other organizations? And liaisons is one of the ways that we do that. So next I'm going to talk about how when we are part of these groups, we have these boundaries, how that can result in some inequities. But the good news is that with liaisons, when you're collecting data, when you have insiders, you can actually identify these gaps, and then you can make your activities more inclusive. So the series of pie charts here, 2017, 2018, you're going to see this huge chunk of purple. And this is the outreach that Virginia Tech is doing to 5 different strands in this one school system. And there's a whole lot of purple and not a lot of other colors. And you can see that really 70% of outreach is going to this Blacksburg strand, the purple color. But the center pie chart, this goal is that we really want about 40% of outreach to be going there. Also, Blacksburg ends up being the closest to the university. So students who are just close in proximity are going to schools that are closer to them, often because that's what's easy and they don't have cars and transportation to reach other areas. But once we found this out, we were really able to take this finding to student groups, to faculty researchers, and you start to see in 2018, 2019, we have this chart. We actually have all of the school strands represented now with outreach, whereas before we were missing one of them. To see that the purple is shrinking proportionately, so we're creating new outreach activities. But without this collection of data, without the communication from liaisons to both groups, that's not something that really would have been possible. A lot of the equity that I focused on has been this idea of STEM careers that don't need a college degree to access them. So how can we have students who are able to go straight from high school into a career, and they can either continue to learn, receive more education, but how can they be making money right away? Because for some students, that's a really important lesson, something that they really need to support themselves and their families. And one of the key ways to do that is to have students be able to get these ideas of credentialing or certificates while they're in high school. And we've done things like manage to waive seat time requirements so that students will have more time for internships. We've also focused on events that recruit underrepresented populations to our STEM activities. One of the big events we do is called Girls' Day, where we encourage girls to come and learn about STEM careers. And they can sometimes be very non-traditional STEM careers. They can learn about how to be an auto mechanic. They can learn about how they can work in facilities at universities, or even things like helping lay computer wires. And these careers actually allow for a lot of additional education and advancement with the university. For me, one of the reasons that this has been so important is, you'll see on the slide, actually a picture of my father. He was an HVAC technician, and even though he's in his 70s now, he still continues to be called to do HVAC for people to come back to work, because there's such a shortage of skilled workers in these positions that even people who are in their 70s are still being called to please come back and work for us. So I do this work not just because we see that there's a gap and that this is a great employment opportunity for students, but also because my father needs to be able to retire as well. So these are ways that we can really engage these diverse communities, is this idea of collecting data, having support for what we might anecdotally know to be true, but without that data, we don't really have a convincing story to tell people. And this creating this bi-directional relationship is what allows our engagement to actually leverage our relationship to be the most successful that it can be. Our goal here is to expand beyond these short-term projects into these long-term. So identifying the gaps really helps us work together to increase equity. And now my story's over, and we're going to move on to Kim's story about how university outreach activities can be boosted with school-based applications. And she'll talk more about how she's reaching these under-resourced populations, also increasing equity, and how she's working to engage these diverse communities in STEM careers in a more inclusive way.
Cool, thanks, Julie. So you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. First of all, I just want to make note that promoting inclusivity can look different based on different student needs. I am working for Floyd County Public Schools, and it's a predominantly white school system, and what diversity means to our students may be totally different than what actually the needs are for another school system. I think that it's important just to even think about exposure to different cultures and different cultural events as being an important impact. Exposing our students to something as simple as going on a field trip into an area that has crosswalks or taxis, and our students putting together, number one, there are different rules here and there are different thoughts about how to cross the road or the street or whatever they call it in the city, which is very different than our very rural area. And just those kind of experiences and exposure is so important, and such, it's so impactful to their understandings of the bigger world. So in February of 2020, Floyd County received an Advancing Computer Science and Education grant. And one of the goals of that grant was to increase teacher understanding of computer science standards. And, this was a big undertaking for our school. And so we were really excited. I was starting to think about, let's start with kindergarten. Let's start something kind of base level. And we were specifically going to focus on algorithms and programming instruction. And we know, like, start off somewhere successful, start with something teachers and students are familiar with. And so the standard actually that we were focusing on was students will construct sets of step-by-step instructions, which are algorithms, including sequencing, emphasizing the beginning, middle, and end. And so in my head, I was twirling around these ideas of what are some routines that students already do that we can think about beginning, middle, and end. And so I was thinking about, students and teachers do a lot of kinesthetic greetings. And so we could easily turn those greetings, like the high fives and the fist bumps and like a little dance with your teacher, into some kind of algorithm. And we could even, just if you planned it out, like high five, fist bump, do a little dance, and then you do it again, then it's called looping in computer science, right? So super excited about all of these ideas and getting them down into a lesson plan. And this was around, we found out we got the grant in February. So this was around March of 2020. And do you guys remember March of 2020? Yeah, yes. So that is when the COVID pandemic really started to take huge effects on everyone. And so school closures ensued, and these kind of ideas and things were definitely tabled, and we all started pivoting different directions and did what we needed to do, right? So in the fall, our students did come back eventually. And once they came back, these protective measures were taken. And so our students were not able to high five one another and fist bump one another and even be in close proximity to like moving forward with this little um, sequencing and algorithms lesson plan did not seem to be beneficial at that time, right? So I was a little, again, heartbroken, and um, we have our liaison group meetings, our CENI team meetings on Monday mornings, and we get together and we talk. And we talk about emails that have been sent to be shared with us, and we talk about, generally what things are going on. And in November, Dr. Carrie Kroller of the Virginia Tech Center for Communicating Science had sent out a video playlist on YouTube that included several videos it was called Girls Launch. And so we were talking about this during one of our meetings, and one of the liaisons specifically mentioned, be sure you watch it because, the diverse populations and women in science, it's there. Like those are definitely goals that we have, and she just was talking about it's there, and I hadn't watched all of the videos at that point in time, and so I went back after our meeting and I went through and watched the videos, and um, I just could not even believe that one of the videos included a segment that had like step by step instructions on something that all of us, especially kindergartners, first graders, with all of their funness, were focusing on, which was washing their hands. And so part of this video segment that was shared with us that I was encouraged by others to watch just on the fly happened to have this step by step section in it. And you can go ahead to the next one. So at that point, I was like, oh my gosh. And it was the videos were actually created for primary younger students. And so I created a lesson about sequencing, a step by step algorithm for hand washing, and I shared the video and the lesson plan with our teachers. And our teachers loved the reinforcement of the routine that was being like encouraged so much at school and at home. Um, so after these things were shared, our teachers were able to reflect on the video and the lesson plan during one of our professional developments. And the question was asked, what takeaways may our students gain from using the video other than the content and the computer science skills stated? Our teachers were able to be like, oh yeah, I see sequencing, I see algorithms, I see putting these things in order. But other than that, why would you use this video to teach sequencing and algorithms? So the responses were quite beautiful. Um, you know, our teachers were able to come up with, this video, we could discuss diversity in general. It was a snapshot of a scientist, a female scientist, diversity in what scientists can look like, brown women in science, rocket, women in important science positions, introduction to STEM careers. So our teachers came up with, hey, this is a reason to use this video other than the computer science tie-in. And, deliberately choosing to create this kind of resource and deliberately choosing to use this kind of resource is what's going to increase awareness of STEM careers and diversity in general in our underrepresented populations. And I did want to point out the real, not animated one. That's a real comment right there, because so many of our students are exposed only to animation, and the ability to be exposed to diversity in real life and see real people is very important. So to promote inclusivity, to me, it's so important to intentionally expose students to inclusive resources, strategically using human and material resources and taking that deliberate action. Also, I think it's so important to share resources widely. Our resources that we've created are on Go Open Virginia, which is an open educational resource. But anytime that you're able to find resources or create resources that are going to promote inclusivity, please don't hold on to them yourself and share them.
Thanks, Kim. So Kim's story talks about how we have this community of liaisons and how when we have all of these shared goals between different school systems, you can, by sharing them, you can increase the impact that your project's going to have. You can reach a whole wider audience. And also reach a variety of different contexts as well. So next we're going to have Jamie tell her story. She's going to talk about a few examples of how schools can be more generative of opportunities for research. And Kim, Virginia Tech made this project, and then it was really great and school systems capitalized on it. And Jamie will talk about how projects can sort of go the other way and be inspired by schools' needs as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Little, work for Radford City Schools. It's about 20 minutes from Virginia Tech. And just to give you an idea of our demographics, we're about 49% free and reduced lunch in our school system, and minorities represent about 24%. Like Floyd, where Kim is, it's a pretty rural area, and our affiliation with Virginia Tech has just been awesome, this Liaison program. And I have no doubt that it's brought opportunities and partnerships to Radford that we just otherwise would not have been able to have. I want to focus on 3 different projects and talk about them fairly briefly. And the first is career chats. So as Kim mentioned, the spring of 2020, we had these face-to-face career chats, lunch and learn sessions in our library, and we were trying to focus on a career cluster with each career chat. And, of course, the pandemic hit and schools were closed. So through CENI, if you'll go to the next slide, please, Julie, they partnered us and connected us with these wonderful people, Virginia Tech affiliates in each of these career areas. And they gave virtual presentations for us. And they were just wonderful. And the group was just very diverse as far as age, race, and even the educational attainment that is needed for each career area. So it was an incredible group of speakers. We also partnered with Virginia Tech Engineering Online, who hosted the Zoom meetings and recorded them for us. So after that, CENI hired a group to, oh, not quite yet, same career chats. CENI hired a group to edit our videos. So Kim in Floyd County has already shared those videos throughout her county, and they will also be part of the Go Open Virginia, the open educational resource. So they'll be shared across the state. So it's a pretty neat thing that it certainly was an advantage to us, but this is a resource that can be shared too. All right, the next project I want to talk about, this is unique in that it really was student initiated. A small group of students at our local high school requested a meeting with administrators and said, hey, we'd really like a studio to create hip hop music. And the administrators took them seriously. Through CENI, I was connected with a group on the Virginia Tech campus. It's a hip hop studies group. And together we wrote a grant, a CENI Jones seed grant for us to create this studio on the Radford High School campus. And it was just an awesome partnership. The pictures on the right are students at a workshop that was conducted by this group on the Tech campus. And they just went through the entire music creation process from beginning to end, and came out with a song they had created just in one workshop. It was an incredible experience to see, but also for the students, having that hands-on experience from students who aren't much older than them. On the left is one wall of our studio, which is pretty impressive. Tech hired a mural artist to come in and do this. So you can imagine how excited the kids are. And again, COVID-19 hit. We didn't even have club meetings this year, but plan to pick up where we left off last year. But another neat thing about this is it really hasn't stopped. Again, it was a real advantage when I first contacted the hip hop group on the Tech campus about this possibility. They were so excited and said they had been trying to think of ways to engage the community, and have some outreach there. So they were very excited to do this. And now they've written another grant with a school in Roanoke City. So, the idea is that it just keeps spreading. We will be working with that group as well whenever we're able to all function together. So pretty neat stuff. The last one is our newest program, and as you can tell, it's under construction. And we are working with the Virginia Tech College Access Collaborative, and they work with school districts throughout the state who, just are really disadvantaged, poverty. The list is there. And what our goal is to institute a freshman transition program for the coming school year. And this is brand new to them. It will utilize college students, so near peers for our high school students, to address such topics as organization, study skills, career preparation, college preparation. So I think it will be a really awesome project. And again, it will be great for our students. It will be good for this program, but we're looking at this as a pilot. So, it will be spread across the state with all the other affiliates with the CAC. So we're super excited about it. And just, I guess in conclusion, the liaison position has really given me access to knowledge and people and places that it just wouldn't happen otherwise, especially in a rural setting like we have. So it's just been a huge advantage to us, but I think our work has spread far beyond the borders of just our school system, and it's been great.
All right, thanks, Jamie. And while I welcome you all to drop any questions in the chat about our projects, or unmute and feel free to interrupt while we're going on. We still have some more presentation. So Jamie's story was again about this generative effect. And next we're going to talk about Chelsea's project. So I see that there's a question in the chat. I think we'll take the questions at the end as well. Yeah. So Chelsea is going to talk about evaluation and how you can use evaluation to increase inclusivity in our outreach. Take it away, Chelsea.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to offer a couple examples. I often consult with departments and other organizations if they want to build a survey or do some assessment through interviews or focus groups. And I frequently get asked questions about demographics like gender and sex and race and ethnicity, and like, should I even collect this information, or how do I collect this information, or how do I use it? You know, especially with national initiatives to focus on women and girls in STEM, or broadening participation for racially minoritized groups in STEM, that comes up about every conversation I have. And if they don't bring it up, I usually bring it up and ask, like, well, are you collecting gender? And I often kind of get the response, well, oh, I don't know, how should I? I also often get the response, well, you know, I know just from looking at my students, I know I have about this many girls or this many boys or women or men in my classes, or maybe I'm not sure. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. So when I think about evaluation, just in terms, I'm really thinking about how we make decisions about programs, whether to like continue them or if we need to stop them based on numbers or based on quality. So kind of like evidence informed or evidence-based decision making. Whereas assessment, I really think about just about continuous improvement. So we're not making a judgment about whether or not to keep a program or initiative. We just want to improve that own program year to year. And so culturally responsive assessment kind of takes that continuous improvement lens, but then looks at how do we incorporate equity and inequities, as well as culture and cultural-based assets, and how do we kind of use that to inform our assessment process? Because if we don't, we know that our assessment process is just one other system where inequities can persist within, and so that will then just continue to benefit privileged groups. Next slide. So a couple of terms, kind of going to focus more on gender and sex here, but when we think about biological sex or sex assigned at birth, we're really thinking about the physiology, so internal, external appearance, genetic makeup, or biochemistry, hormones. And so some examples might be male, female, intersex. Whereas gender is a social construction, and that might assign some kind of these culturally constructed roles or attributes to people, often based on their assigned sex, but it really is more of a social construction. Gender identity, that would be something like how a person might use to describe their gender. And so they might use terms such as girl, boy, man, woman, genderqueer, trans man or trans woman, agender. And gender expression is often behavioral or aesthetic or psychological characteristics by which that person communicates or by which someone observes their gender identity. And so some examples of gender expression might be butch, femme, feminine, masculine, androgynous, trans feminine. Race, ethnicity, again, race more about physical appearances, kind of subscribed to folks, whereas ethnicity looks more at cultural, ancestral differences between communities. And so we just want to not conflate those. And so for these and other demographic information, kind of remember it's fluid. These things change for people over time. Context matters. You know, you might use something in the South that may not be used in the North, that may not be used in this county versus this city. And folks have different opinions about different terms. They can be highly contextual, or highly contested. You know, folks from a minoritized identity might want to reclaim a term that was previously used as a slur or is very derogatory, and they might want to reclaim that by using that as part of their identity. Next slide. So if we think about data collection, it falls along this big continuum. And so kind of least inclusive, we might think about single select typed answers if we're thinking about like a quantitative survey type question, whereas you can be more inclusive with multiple select questions, or have multiple select with a write-in, and then open-ended questions where someone gets to kind of just state their own identity would be the most inclusive. So next slide. So here, when we think about data collection, we want to think about, do you need to collect demographics? Why do you want to collect them? If you collect them, make sure we use them, and know upfront how you're going to use them. It's always important to consider what terminology is being used by your community. And so, for example, here is how one department, our service learning department here at Virginia Tech, explained the why in a survey so that way their participants would know why they were collecting information about their gender identity. Another kind of caveat to keep in mind is that if your instrument or your interview question didn't ask about gender identity, don't make the assumption based on your observation, or based on if you work on a college campus or in a school system that collects pronouns, don't assume that that is the gender identity that the person currently subscribes to. Don't assume that whatever phenomenon is happening, like whatever you're observing, don't assume that that is due to someone's gender identity. Instead, just make a note that this would be something we want to look into further and ask next time. So from this one consulting project I did with a department on a college campus, they had some single select options for what is your gender identity: man, woman, transgender, or decline to state. So that offers a few options. However, it doesn't allow folks to kind of give you more information. It only allows them to have one option, and it kind of boxes folks in. In the middle, we have another multiple select option where if you have quantitative data, you want to be able to analyze it. You're going to have these folks were expecting about 1,000 responses to their survey. So, a write-in was not a practical option for them, but they still wanted to be very inclusive. So a few strategies they used here was a multiple select box. That way, for example, someone could select that they were trans as well as woman. They could select trans woman if they wanted. However, a trans woman might just identify as a woman, so they could also just select woman. They took away the other kind of category and instead used the language prefer to specify, so that it still allowed some folks to have a write-in option if they did not see their identity represented here. They also reordered the question words so that man, a category that might hold the most privilege under gender identity, was not the first option. They elected to do more of an alphabetical order. So again, write-in, most inclusive option, but is not always practical if you're expecting a large number of responses. Next slide. So thinking about data analysis and reporting, great if you can report things in aggregate. So, kind of including all your identities, as long as you're protecting your folks. We typically use the rule of 5. We don't want to disaggregate down to folks below 5 because then someone might be able to easily identify them. And when thinking about gender identity, don't assume that someone's gender identity influences their experience unless you directly ask that as a part of your assessment question. So for example, you might have a list of this question that, yes, everyone here preferred grapes. And I see that girls preferred grapes, boys do not prefer grapes. I don't want to assume that it's because they're a girl that they preferred grapes. And if I didn't say, so because of your identity as a girl, does that play a role in you preferring grapes? So just try not to get those kind of mixed up. Next slide. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Chelsea. So Chelsea really talks about how we can share our expertise. A lot of school systems don't have evaluators, culturally sensitive evaluators who can help with this idea of program improvement, with survey creation. So having liaisons help share our skill set, and also makes it so that when we have these people with skill sets that emphasize equitable assessment and inclusivity, that we can really reach out to them. And then our last story is going to be from Phyllis, and she's going to talk about this idea of long-term engagement and how, so you'll notice that myself, Jamie, and Kim all work with school systems. Phyllis works with a museum, which still has largely a K-12 audience as well, but definitely works on its own timeline and has its own perspectives and differences between formal and informal education. And what we see is that when we have these long-term partnerships, they really have benefits. So typically when we create long-term partnerships, we see that there's a lack of shared language between the groups, that these different organizations might have different norms, cultural expectations, that we may not be able to feel like we trust each other, but we do have shared goals. We do want to reach the same outcome. So having these partnerships can actually benefit us. We can create repositories of assets. We have access to knowledge, places, and people. So Phyllis, take it away with your story.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. It is a little echoey in here. I apologize. I'm at the museum today and I had a different spot earlier, but there's one small group of kids here as part of their care and education program, and they had set up a rousing game of some kind of ball right behind me. So now I'm in a lab, so a little echoey, all good. But I want to talk about museum exhibits as outreach and kind of what that can do for us. I'm in my 5th year as the liaison between the Science Museum of Western Virginia in Roanoke, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. And in that time, when the museum reopens next month, I think there will be 9 Virginia Tech exhibits on the 2 floors of the museum. So it's not a gigantic museum, but a heavy Virginia Tech presence, although the museum is certainly not owned by Virginia Tech at all. It is a partnership of the 2 independent organizations. So I want to talk about kind of what a museum exhibit can do. We've got a number of goals that we work for. And one of those is that goal of inclusivity. And I like what Kim said about, when we're working with a primarily white population, part of what we want to see is to help them make sure that they see scientists who are not white, to normalize people of color and women and all kinds of diversity in our scientists. So when we put in a Virginia Tech exhibit, we also put in a bit about the scientists. We want to make sure that those people who visit the museum, either through school groups or through their camps, or just visiting as a member of the public, do see that scientists are regular people doing cool things, and that they're people who live here. Scientists and science is not something that's far away, and only famous people or only people on TV are doing this. This is people you could run into in the grocery store. So we're making a point to include pictures to show that representation. I'm not going to read you all this text. I included this because this is some text that will go on the wall along with these pictures for an exhibit that's going in now about gliding snakes, not flying snakes, but gliding ones. So we love this representation. We love that we're able to show these scientists. And I want to talk also about the timelines. One of the things that we learned early on when we kind of created this liaison position and began the work, and you all probably know this as broader impacts professionals, but the timelines of museums versus universities are very different. So when someone at the museum says, I want to do an exhibit, they can design it and build it and have it on the museum floor in, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 months. But from the university timeline, where we're talking about broader impacts and career grants, you come up with the idea and then you propose it, and then you wait 6 months, and then you do your research for a year or 2, and then you make the museum exhibit. So it's as much as 2 or 3 or 4 years. And so just understanding those timelines requires that we have a solid relationship between the museum and the university, a stable relationship. So, so being the liaison is very rewarding, but it's also rewarding for both the university and the museum. And it's just a great way to extend the outreach, to make it longer term. We have some exhibits now that have been on the floor for 4 years. And so they've seen a lot of people, and we're about to put in a bunch more. So we're excited for this work, and excited for the ways that we can foster inclusivity and also help the Virginia Tech researchers bring their work to a wider audience.
So that is the end of our presentation, and we still have a couple minutes. So I encourage you to either unmute and ask a question or type it in the chat. We did have a question earlier about funding, which was mostly answered in the chat, I think. Yeah, the question was how much funding comes from schools versus the university? Is it all core funding, or is it some of it soft funding from grants? And the answer is, it depends. It definitely varies by position. My position is 50-50 between the school and Virginia Tech, whereas Jamie, Kim, and Phyllis, Phyllis is more Virginia Tech than she is museum. Jamie and Kim are technically more school than they are Virginia Tech. So it's really flexible. It depends on what works for the partners. And that's really something that you have to have a lot of communication around, just figuring out what all the needs are of both groups, and what funding is available as well, and how you can make the most of that.
How did you get them to agree to fund these? What was the process at the beginning to say, money to do this?
So for us, I think I can say for Montgomery County, which was the first school system that participated in this, and that they started to see a need from the school system perspective, as well as from the Virginia Tech perspective. From Virginia Tech, people were just reaching out to whoever they knew. Like, my friend from yoga is a teacher, so they help me do outreach because they know me. But on the school system side, that's really not how you want your outreach to happen, is because you happen to be in a yoga class with someone. It doesn't reach students equitably. And also sometimes you don't control the quality of the outreach. So it could be bad or good. And administrators at both levels have started to become invested and see that we need this to change if we want to create, not only give faculty the best access that they can, but also for the school system, create a funnel of research that makes sense, and create a system of quality outreach that's reaching the students that really need it. So it was how we got people to participate was that we talked about how important it is, and convinced them that there's a need for it, and that there could be an improvement. But definitely this position from a school systems perspective is a risk. It's very different. It's not something that you would normally see in a school system, or even with a museum or with a lot of groups. So you have to find someone who's going to champion it, and someone who's going to be willing to take that risk with you. All right, we are at time. So thank you all for attending. And we're really excited. If you have any questions, we can stick around, and otherwise, please enjoy the rest of your ARIS conference.